A German shepherd emerged from a rain-choked forest outside Sierra Falls, ribs showing, one leg failing, eyes still sharp. She wasn't lost. She was waiting. Beneath a pine, 2 newborn pups cried, and she had chosen the one man who could help. A former Navy SEAL driving through the dark would learn what it means to be trusted by a warrior who'd already been abandoned once. No one knew who erased her past. No one thought she'd fight again. But some bonds don't need permission. What happens next will break you, then heal you. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. And if you believe no soldier is ever truly left behind, subscribe now. Autumn had settled heavily over Sierra Falls, a small mountain town tucked into the eastern edge of Washington state. The kind of town where fog clung to pine-covered slopes long after sunrise, where roads curved like old scars through forest and stone. Rain had been falling since morning. Not a storm, not a drizzle, but the steady, bone-soaking kind that turned fallen maple leaves into slick red-gold paste on asphalt. The sky was a dull, unbroken gray, and the mountains seemed to lean inward, listening. Ethan Crest drove alone through it. At 28, Ethan was young by most standards, but the years had already written themselves into the set of his shoulders and the way his eyes scanned the road. He had the build of a man, shaped by training rather than comfort. Lean, dense muscle beneath a dark jacket, movements economical even behind the wheel. His hair was cropped short in the practical style he'd worn since his teens, dark and slightly uneven where he'd cut it himself. His face was clean-shaven, angular, with a faint scar along his jaw that most people mistook for a shaving cut. The rain tapped steadily against the windshield as his truck climbed the narrow mountain road leading out of town and deeper into the forest. He had been driving for hours, no music, no radio. Silence suited him better these days. Ever since leaving the teams, sound had become something he tolerated rather than enjoyed. He was no longer a Navy SEAL in uniform, but the habits hadn't left him. Eyes moving, hands steady. Mind cataloging distance, terrain, exits. Always exits. The road ahead narrowed, flanked by towering pines and slopes thick with wet leaves. That was when he saw her. At first, Ethan thought it was a shadow thrown wrong by his headlights, something darker against the rain-slick shoulder of the road. He eased off the gas, squinting through the blur of water. The shape shifted. A dog. She stood just off the pavement, ribs faintly visible beneath a soaked black and tan coat. A German shepherd, female, tall but frighteningly thin. One of her hind legs was bent at an odd angle, forcing her weight forward. Rain ran down her muzzle in thin streams, her ears half flattened. Not in fear, but exhaustion. She didn't run. Ethan pulled over without thinking. The truck's tires crunched against wet gravel as he stepped out, rain instantly seeping into his boots. The cold air smelled of pine sap and damp earth. He kept his hands visible as he approached, posture relaxed, but alert. "Hey," he said quietly, voice low and steady. The dog watched him with amber eyes, clear, focused, intelligent. No wild panic, no aggression, just attention. As he closed the distance, she took one step forward, then another, each movement careful, controlled despite the pain. She didn't bark, didn't growl. Instead, she pressed her body against his leg. The contact was deliberate, not the clumsy lean of a frightened stray, but a precise, purposeful movement, shoulder aligned, weight measured. Ethan froze, a strange tightness forming in his chest. That wasn't an accident. He'd felt that before, on patrol, on perimeter, a teammate closing distance in silence, trusting you to hold. "Easy," he murmured, lowering himself into a crouch. Her body trembled beneath his hand, but she didn't pull away. Her breathing was shallow, rapid, yet controlled. Up close, he saw old scars along her flank and the faint indentation of a collar that had once been there for a long time. This dog had been trained. A sudden sound cut through the rain, a thin, broken whimper. Ethan's head snapped up. The dog's ears twitched instantly, turning toward the trees. She shifted her weight, then looked back at him, eyes locking onto his face. Then she turned and began to limp away from the road, stopping every few steps to check that he was following. "All right," Ethan said under his breath. "I'm with you." She led him down a shallow slope toward a cluster of pine trees. Beneath one of them, half hidden by wet needles and a rotting scrap of tarp, lay two tiny shapes. Puppies? Two German Shepherd pups, no more than a few weeks old, their eyes still closed. They were pressed together for warmth, fur-matted, bodies shaking with cold. One let out another weak cry. Ethan felt something inside him shift, sharp and familiar, the same instinct that had pulled him forward under gunfire, that had made retreat feel impossible when someone was still down. The mother dog nosed one pup gently, then looked up at him again. Not pleading, not begging, choosing. "We'll get you help," he said, already shrugging off his jacket. He wrapped the puppies carefully, lifting them with hands that had once learned to carry wounded men through dust and blood. Then he turned back to the mother, supporting her weight as they made their way to the truck. She didn't resist when he helped her in, settling beside the pups with her body curved protectively around them. As Ethan pulled back onto the road, rain still falling, he glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "You picked the right guy," he said quietly. On the opposite side of Sierra Falls, the forest told a different story. Noah Pike moved carefully between the trees, camera strap tied around his wrist. At 18, he was tall but slightly hunched, as if trying to make himself smaller than the world around him. His dark hair fell into his eyes no matter how often he pushed it back, and his clothes, oversized flannel, worn boots, suggested practicality rather than style. Noah didn't come into the woods for excitement. He came for quiet. Living with his grandmother on the edge of town, he had learned early that silence could be safer than conversation. The forest never demanded explanations. It simply existed. That afternoon, he had been filming the way mist drifted through the trees when a sharp, muffled sound split the air. Not thunder. Noah froze. He lowered the camera slightly, heart pounding. Then he heard it again. A short, suppressed crack. A gunshot, wrapped tight in something meant to hide it. He followed the sound without thinking, staying low, breath shallow. Through the lens, he caught movement in a clearing near the protected boundary of the reserve. A deer collapsed. The shot had been clean. Too clean. No legal hunter would fire here, not this close to town, not with a suppressor. As Noah adjusted his angle, the camera picked up something else. A bright orange marking sprayed onto the trunk of a nearby tree. A crude symbol, but intentional. A sign. He knew enough to understand what he was seeing. Poachers. A voice carried faintly through the trees, low and impatient. Noah backed away, heart hammering, boots slipping on wet leaves. He didn't run until he was far enough to breathe. That night, back in his small room, he watched the footage again. His hands shook as he hovered over the delete button. Someone knocked on the front door earlier than usual the next evening. Two men stood on the porch. Both wore rain-dark jackets and expressions that didn't quite reach their eyes. One of them smiled, thin and cold. "Nice camera," the man said casually. "Be a shame if you lost some footage." They never touched him, never raised their voices. They didn't need to. After they left, Noah sat on his bed in the dark, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Eventually, he deleted the video from his camera. Then, hours later, he reached beneath his mattress and pulled out a second memory card. The backup. He stared at it for a long time, rain tapping against the window like a question he wasn't ready to answer. Ethan's truck cut through the rain toward the only veterinary clinic still lit in Sierra Falls. Behind him, the German Shepherd lifted her head just enough to watch the road ahead, her body shielding her pups. Despite the pain, despite the cold, her eyes stayed open. Two lives moving toward each other in the same storm. Neither of them knew it yet. The veterinary clinic in Sierra Falls stayed lit long after most storefronts had gone dark. Rain streaked down the windows in uneven lines, blurring the glow of the street lamp outside. Inside, the air was warm and sharp with antiseptic, layered with the damp smell of wet fur. Dr. Clementine Ward moved with calm efficiency. She was in her early 30s, slim but strong, her dark chestnut hair tied back in a loose ponytail that slipped free as she worked. Years of night emergencies had given her steady hands and a voice that never rose, even when everything else did. "Let's take this slow," she said, guiding Ethan Crest as he helped lift the German Shepherd onto the examination table. Up close, the dog's condition was worse than it had looked in the rain. Her ribs showed clearly beneath her soaked coat. One hind leg carried her weight wrong, the joint stiff and angled from an old injury. Despite the pain, her eyes stayed alert, tracking every movement in the room. Ethan remained close. Whenever Clementine stepped away, the dog's gaze followed him, muscles tightening until he returned within arm's reach. "She only settles when you're near," Clementine observed quietly. "That's not fear, that's trust." Clementine began the exam methodically. Temperature, pulse, hydration. Her fingers traced along the injured leg, stopping where the bone had healed unevenly. "This fracture isn't recent," she said. "Weeks, maybe months old. It was never properly set." Ethan's jaw tightened. He watched the dog's ears flick once, but she made no sound. Clementine parted the fur along the dog's neck and shoulders. Faint scars emerged, small, precise marks that didn't belong to accidents or animals. "Electrical scarring," Clementine said, her tone sharpening. "And here, pressure abrasions, from a locking collar, training grade." Ethan exhaled slowly. "So she wasn't abandoned yesterday?" "No," Clementine replied. "She was used." The two puppies were placed in a heated box nearby. At every small movement, the mother shifted subtly, positioning her body between them and the rest of the room, as if maintaining an invisible perimeter. Clementine retrieved a handheld scanner. "I'm checking for a microchip." The device passed over the dog's shoulder. It beeped. Clementine turned to the aging computer behind the counter, typing quickly. The screen flickered, then loaded fragmented records. Her expression changed. "She's registered," Clementine said. "Military Working Dog Database." Ethan straightened slightly. "What unit?" Clementine frowned. "That's the problem. Unit designation is missing. Handler name corrupted. Someone wiped it clean." Ethan stared at the screen. He'd seen erased files before. They never happened by accident. Clementine glanced back at the dog. A working dog like this doesn't just get lost, especially not with injuries like hers. Ethan looked down at her. She met his gaze, steady and unflinching despite exhaustion. "She needs a name," he said. Clementine nodded. "Go on." "Rogue," Ethan said, "because she survived without permission." The dog's ear twitched at the sound. Before Clementine could respond, the clinic door opened. A tall man in a dark green sheriff's jacket stepped inside, rein clinging to the shoulders. Deputy Hank Mercer paused just past the threshold. Mid-40s, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped sandy hair and a weathered face, Mercer carried himself with the restraint of someone used to keeping secrets. His eyes moved across the room, and then locked onto Rogue. He froze. The reaction was instant and unmistakable. Rogue's posture shifted as well, muscles tightening, eyes fixed on him. Mercer swallowed. "Evening," he said, voice controlled but strained. "You know her," Ethan said quietly. Mercer avoided his eyes. "I know dogs," he replied too quickly. "Working dogs." Clementine straightened. "She needs care, Hank. Whatever this is, it waits?" Mercer nodded, hands clenched in his jacket pockets. "Of course." He looked at Rogue again, something like guilt flickering across his face before he forced it down. "If she's military," Mercer said, "there are federal channels. You should be careful." Ethan didn't move. "I can handle careful." Mercer finally met his eyes for a brief second. "Some things get erased for a reason," he said, "and sometimes they don't stay buried." With that, he stepped back, leaving more questions than answers behind. Clementine finished setting the IV and pain medication. Rogue's breathing eased slightly as the fluids began to work. Ethan rested a hand near her head. She relaxed just enough to close her eyes, but not fully sleep. Outside the clinic, across the street, Noah Pike stood beneath the awning of a closed shop. 18, tall and thin, with dark hair falling into his eyes, Noah watched the clinic door with a mix of fear and resolve. His hands were buried deep in his pockets, fingers curled around a small memory card. He had seen Ethan bring the dog in, seen the way the man moved, quiet, controlled, unafraid. Someone who wouldn't look away. Noah stayed where he was, not ready yet, but watching. Inside, Ethan looked down at Rogue and understood the truth settling heavily in his chest. She wasn't a stray. She was a soldier who had been left behind. The cabin sat back from the gravel road, half hidden by a stand of maples that had shed most of their leaves. Autumn pressed in close here. Damp air carried the smell of wet wood and pine, and the forest floor glowed in rust and gold beneath a low, overcast sky. Smoke rose thinly from the stone chimney, dissolving into the gray. Ethan Crest moved through the small space with quiet efficiency. The cabin had 2 rooms and a narrow loft, built sturdy decades earlier by hands that valued function over comfort. He kept the lights low, the fire steady. Rogue lay on a thick blanket near the hearth, her injured leg braced and elevated, the 2 puppies tucked against her belly in a warm box lined with towels. She watched Ethan constantly, tracking his movement as if counting steps. He spoke little. When he did, it was practical. Water, food, temperature, short phrases delivered without ceremony. Rogue responded in kind, not with affection, but with posture. When Ethan crossed the room, she adjusted her body to keep herself between him and the door. When the fire popped, she lifted her head, ears angling toward the sound, then settled when he glanced back. Night fell early. Wind worked through the trees, carrying a restless hiss across the cabin walls. Ethan washed his hands, set the kettle on, and checked Rogue's leg again. She accepted the touch without flinching. Her breathing was shallow but even. Sometime after midnight, sleep took him the way it often did, sudden and heavy. It didn't last. Heat, sand, a burst of light where there shouldn't have been one. Ethan jerked awake with a sharp inhale, heart hammering, hands already searching for a weapon that wasn't there. The fire crackled, indifferent. Shadows crawled along the ceiling beams. Rogue was on him in a second. She didn't jump or whine. She pressed her weight against his chest, firm and deliberate, her head settling beneath his chin. Her breathing slowed, long, measured exhales. And after a moment, his followed. The rhythm steadied him. He closed his eyes and counted, letting the world narrow to warmth, fur, and the simple fact of staying. When the tension eased, Rogue remained where she was, a quiet anchor. No romance in it, just presence. Morning came with fog and the sound of dripping leaves. Ethan split wood and boiled water, keeping movements minimal to avoid jostling Rogue. She watched the puppies nurse, then lifted her head at a distant sound. An engine, far off, then gone. By mid-morning, someone stood at the edge of the clearing. Noah Pike hovered near the tree line, hands jammed into his jacket pockets, shoulders drawn in as if bracing for impact. At 18, he was tall but unsure of his height, dark hair falling into his eyes, no matter how often he pushed it back. His clothes were practical and worn, his expression tight with effort. Ethan noticed him because Rogue did. Her ears pricked, body stiffening. Ethan stepped outside, stopping a few paces from the porch. "You lost?" Ethan asked, voice even. Noah swallowed. I saw your truck," he said. His eyes flicked to the cabin, then back to the ground. "I need to talk to you." They stood in the wet leaves, fog threading between trunks. Noah took a breath and spoke quickly, as if afraid the words would turn on him if he slowed. "I filmed something in the reserve," he said. "A deer, shot where it shouldn't have been, suppressed. There were markings on the trees. They came to my place, told me to delete it." Ethan didn't interrupt. "I did," Noah added, then lifted his chin a fraction. "But I kept a backup." A branch snapped somewhere beyond the clearing. Rogue growled low in her chest, a sound felt more than heard. "They're watching," Noah said. "I think they followed you from town." Ethan's gaze slid to the trees. He nodded once. "You did the right thing coming here." Before Noah could answer, the cabin door shuddered. The sound was wrong, metal on wood, deliberate. Rogue surged to her feet despite the brace, pain flaring across her posture. Ethan moved without thinking, shoving Noah toward the porch railing. "Stay behind me," he said. The door burst inward. Two figures pushed through, faces hidden beneath hoods, movements practiced and fast. One carried a compact device that crackled faintly with blue light. The other scanned the room, eyes snapping to the warming box by the fire. Rogue lunged. The crackle snapped into a harsh arc. Rogue yelped once as the current caught her injured leg, collapsing her mid-stride. The man nearest the fire seized the box and bolted, Puppies crying sharp and thin as the door slammed open again. "No!" Noah shouted, breaking cover. Ethan slammed into the first intruder, driving him backward into the table. Wood splintered. The stun device clattered across the floor. The second man was already gone, boots pounding into the leaves. Rogue tried to rise, dragging herself forward, teeth bared, eyes wild with fury. Ethan grabbed the fallen device and kicked it out of reach, then spun for the door. "Get inside and lock it," he barked at Noah. Ethan hit the threshold just as the engine roared to life beyond the trees. Tires spat gravel. He ran hard into the forest, breath burning, but the sound pulled away, swallowed by wind and distance. He stopped at the edge of the clearing, fists clenched, rage cold and sharp. Back inside, Noah knelt beside Rogue, hands shaking. "I'm sorry," he said, words tumbling. "I should have—" Ethan dropped beside them. He checked Rogue's leg, burned fur, swelling, but no new break. Rogue whined once, then pressed her head into his shoulder, eyes fixed on the door the men had used. "They took them," Noah said, voice breaking. Ethan nodded. He stood and secured the door, then returned, crouching until he was eye level with Rogue. She stared back, breath ragged, body coiled with pain and intent. "We'll get them," he said, quiet and absolute. Rogue's ears lifted, her jaw set, not comforted, focused. Outside, the forest shifted and listened, leaves whispering under a gray sky. Choices had been made, lines crossed, whatever had been erased was moving again, and Ethan was done staying quiet. Fog clung low to the forest floor, threading between trunks like smoke that refused to rise. Sierra Falls disappeared behind a curtain of gray as Ethan Crest moved deeper into the woods. Fallen maple leaves lay slick and dark, pressed flat by days of rain. Every step mattered here. Rogue moved ahead of him, slower than she wanted to be. Her injured leg forced a careful gait, but her focus never wavered. Nose low, tail stiff, She worked the ground with deliberate precision, pausing where tire tracks had churned mud, then angling left where branches had been snapped by hurried boots. She marked softly, then looked back once, checking him, not asking permission. Ethan nodded. He trusted her judgment. He adjusted his pace, placing his feet along exposed roots and stones to avoid noise. Years of SEAL training surfaced without conscious effort, breathing shallow, weight-centered, eyes scanning for disturbance rather than shape. Wet leaves hid tracks quickly, but they also told stories. Compressed patches, dragged foliage, the faint smear of oil where a vehicle had paused too long. Rogue stopped near a fallen cedar, hackles lifting. Ethan crouched, fingertips brushing the bark. Fresh scrape. Someone had passed within the hour. They moved again, angling uphill toward a section of forest long abandoned by logging crews. The land grew uneven, scarred by old ruts and half-buried steel cables. Ahead, the trees thinned, opening onto a clearing choked with weeds and rusted equipment. The lumber yard, a skeletal structure, rose at its center, an old processing shed with a sagging tin roof and boarded windows. Silence pressed down heavy here, broken only by the distant drip of water and the soft click of Rogue's claws on stone. Ethan held up a fist. Rogue froze instantly. Voices carried faintly from inside the shed. 2 men, maybe 3. No raised voices. Controlled. That worried him more than shouting. He eased closer, keeping to the shadow of a stacked log pile. Through a crack in the warped boards, he saw movement. 1 man pacing, another crouched near a crate. And there, small, frantic motion. The puppies. Rogue felt them before she saw them. A low sound vibrated in her chest, not a growl but a contained force, like a weapon held on safety. Ethan placed a hand lightly against her shoulder, grounding her without restraining her. "Wait," he breathed. A vehicle door slammed somewhere beyond the clearing. Footsteps approached from the tree line. Ethan shifted position, body angling to cover both the shed and the approach. The new arrival stepped into view. Broad-shouldered, mid-40s, uniform jacket pulled tight against the cold. His posture was stiff, his movements economical. Deputy Hank Mercer. Mercer stopped short when he saw Ethan. For a moment, surprise broke through his controlled expression. His eyes dropped to Rogue, and something flickered there. Recognition edged with regret. "She's alive," Mercer said quietly. Rogue turned her head, her ears flattened, then lifted again, uncertain. She did not retreat. "You know her," Ethan said, voice flat. Mercer exhaled through his nose. He took off his hat, revealing short-cropped graying hair and a face lined by years of restraint rather than age. "I was her first handler," he said, "before the unit folded, before the paperwork went bad." Ethan didn't lower his guard. "They took her pups." "I know," Mercer replied. "That's why I'm here, and why I should have been here sooner." Inside the shed, a crate scraped against concrete. A puppy yelped. Rogue surged forward. Ethan released her. She hit the shed door hard, slamming into the weakened boards with her shoulder. Wood splintered. The men inside spun in shock as Rogue barreled through, pain forgotten, teeth bared, not in rage, but purpose. Ethan moved with her, fast and controlled. The confrontation was short. 1 man lunged with a length of chain. Ethan intercepted, driving a shoulder into his chest and pinning him against a beam. The 2nd man bolted for the rear exit, straight into Mercer's path. Mercer tackled him without hesitation, cuffs snapping closed with practiced speed. Rogue reached the crate. She shoved it over with her muzzle, ignoring the jolt of pain that rippled through her injured leg. The puppies spilled free, scrambling toward her scent. She nosed them frantically, counting. 1, 2, then gathered them beneath her chest, body curling protectively around them. The 3rd man froze, hands raised, eyes darting between Ethan's steady stance and the German shepherd blocking his escape. "Don't," Ethan said simply. The man dropped to his knees. Minutes later, the clearing filled with the muted crackle of a radio. Red and blue lights filtered weakly through the trees as another patrol unit arrived. The suspects were secured, statements taken with minimal fuss. Noah Pike stood near the edge of the clearing, jacket pulled tight, face pale, but determined. He held out a small memory card to Mercer with a steady hand. "It's all there," Noah said. "The shot, the markings, faces. I didn't alter anything." Mercer accepted it carefully, nodding once. "You did the right thing." Noah swallowed. "I was scared." "That doesn't cancel courage," Mercer replied. Rogue lay on the ground nearby, Puppies pressed close, eyes never leaving Ethan. When he knelt beside her, she leaned into his touch, tension draining inch by inch. Mercer approached slowly. He crouched, keeping his hands visible. "I should have fought harder," he said, voice rough. "When they told me her records were gone, when they said it was easier to forget." Rogue studied him, then turned her head away. Choosing Ethan without hesitation, Mercer nodded, accepting the judgment. "I'll make it right," he said. "Her file, what they erased." Ethan stood, meeting his gaze. "Start with the truth." Mercer looked past him to the forest, then back. "The truth is long overdue." As the rain eased and the fog began to lift, the clearing felt different. Not safe, but resolved. The line had been crossed, and the consequences had followed. Rogue rose carefully, gathering her puppies with practiced efficiency. She moved back to Ethan's side, shoulder brushing his leg in a brief, deliberate contact. Not gratitude. Acknowledgement. They turned toward the forest together, leaving the shed and its secrets behind. The trail back was quieter now, leaves settling, the woods watching as they passed. Some debts once faced no longer chased you. Autumn lingered in Sierra Falls as if reluctant to leave. The maples along the ridge had thinned to bare branches, yet the ground still held color. Deep reds and tired golds pressed into the earth by cool rain. The air carried the clean bite of early frost and the softer scent of cedar smoke drifting from chimneys below. Rogue stood at the edge of the clearing, her posture steady, despite the brace still wrapped around her hind leg. The puppies, stronger now, curious and loud, tumbled over one another near her feet. She watched them without fuss, head high, eyes alert, the way she always had. Not sentimental, protective. Ethan Crest stood a few steps behind her, hands clasped loosely at his back. He wore a simple jacket, dark and worn at the seams, his hair trimmed close in a way that suggested habit rather than vanity. At 28, he looked younger than the weight he carried, older than the years he'd lived. The forest suited him. So did the quiet. A small group gathered near the old barn that marked the edge of the property. The building had been cleaned and repaired, its doors repainted a muted green that blended with the ridge. A wooden sign leaned against the fence, letters carved by hand and darkened by oil. Autumn Ridge, K9, Sanctuary. Deputy Hank Mercer stepped forward, hat in his hands. He'd shed the stiffness he once carried like armor. In daylight, the lines at the corners of his eyes spoke of regret more than age. His uniform was pressed, but his stance was human. Shoulders lowered, breath measured. "Rogue," he said quietly, not commanding, not coaxing. She turned her head just enough to acknowledge him. Mercer knelt and placed a small metal tag on the ground between them. It was worn smooth, edges softened by years of contact. The chain had been replaced with a simple leather cord. "I should have given this back a long time ago," he said. "I was wrong to let you disappear." Rogue stepped forward, sniffed the tag, then looked past it to Ethan. He nodded once. She lowered her head and took the cord gently in her mouth, lifting it without ceremony. Mercer exhaled, the sound barely audible. "Thank you," he said to both of them. A woman in a charcoal coat approached, her presence calm and professional. Director Elaine Morris, early 50s, silver-streaked hair cut to her jaw, eyes sharp but kind. She had spent 3 decades in animal welfare and carried the authority of someone who had learned when to push and when to listen. "With the records restored," Elaine said, holding a slim folder, "and testimony verified, Rogue is formally recognized as a retired K-9. Her service is documented, her status protected." She turned to Ethan. "And you, Mr. Crest, are granted primary guardianship." There was no applause, no cameras flashing, just a few nods and the wind moving through the trees. Ethan accepted the folder, then looked down at Rogue. "We're good," he murmured. She leaned into his leg, one brief, deliberate contact, then returned her attention to the puppies. Noah Pike stood off to the side with a compact camera cradled in both hands. He wore a flannel shirt too big at the shoulders and jeans scuffed at the knees. His hair still fell into his eyes, but he didn't push it back this time. He watched through the lens, steady, patient, framing moments rather than chasing them. When Elaine finished, Noah lowered the camera and stepped closer. "I set up a page," he said, voice calm despite the crowd. "Just updates, stories, where donations go. Nothing flashy." Ethan nodded. "You'll run it?" Noah blinked. "Me?" "You're good at seeing," Ethan said. "That matters." Color touched Noah's cheeks. He nodded once, then lifted the camera again, finding Rogue as she nudged a puppy back from the fence. By late afternoon, the sanctuary felt lived in. Volunteers, neighbors, a retired carpenter, a vet tech from town, moved quietly, finishing small tasks without being asked. A pen had been set along the ridge, wide and shaded. Inside, Rogue paced once, then settled near the entrance, where she could see everything. Ethan walked the perimeter with Elaine, discussing schedules and limits. "We won't take more than we can care for," he said. "No rush." Elaine smiled. "Healing doesn't hurry," she replied. As the sun dipped low, turning the leaves copper and the sky pale blue, Mercer returned with 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Ethan. "For the road ahead," he said. Ethan accepted it. "We'll keep it simple." "That's the hard way," Mercer said. He paused, then added, "If you need anything, paperwork, distance, I'm here." Rogue lifted her head at his voice. Mercer met her gaze and held it. No flinch, no claim. She watched him a moment longer, then rested her chin on her paws. Acceptance, not forgiveness. It was enough. Evening came quietly. A small fire burned in the pit near the barn. The puppies slept in a heap, exhausted from the day. Noah reviewed footage on his camera, deleting anything that felt like noise. He kept a clip of Rogue standing at the gate, leaves drifting past her like slow snow. Ethan sat on a bench, the metal tag looped around Rogue's neck now, resting against her chest. He ran his thumb along its edge, then let it be. "Looks right on her," Noah said softly. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. When the last volunteer left and the ridge returned to silence, Rogue rose and moved to Ethan's side. He stood with her, watching the final leaves fall, one by one, unhurried. This was family, chosen and kept. No speeches, no banners, just ground reclaimed and a promise made visible by work. The wind eased, the fire settled. Autumn held a little longer. And for once, that was enough. Some stories don't end with noise. They end with quiet work, steady hands, and the decision to stay. In everyday life, we all pass moments like that forest road in Sierra Falls. Someone overlooked, something wounded, a truth that feels inconvenient to carry. Healing rarely arrives with applause. It begins when one person chooses responsibility over comfort, patience over fear, and presence over walking away. You don't have to be a soldier to protect. You don't need a uniform to serve. Sometimes the bravest act is simply refusing to let what's broken be forgotten and building a place where it can breathe again. If this story moved you, let it move you forward. Share it with someone who believes in second chances. Leave a comment and tell us what part stayed with you the longest, and if you believe that no one, human or animal, should be left behind, subscribe to the channel so more stories of quiet courage and chosen family can find their way to you. Because healing spreads when we choose to see it, and when we decide to stay.